Hi, it's Mark here with video 5 on Draken Games YouTube channel. And this is the second half of the Vectis playtest summary. And if you've not seen video 3, it's probably a good idea to have a look at that because that talks about Vectis and the idea of the game and the development of it and some of the basics about the rules. It's definitely a good idea to see video 4 because that's the first half of the playtest, without which the second half doesn't make much sense. But assuming you've seen one or both of those two videos, we'll move on with this one, which is turns 7 through to 12, which is days 3 and 4 of the Vectis campaign. Let's firstly just remind ourselves where we got to at the end of turn 6. And as you'll recall, the campaign is spread over 4 days, 3 turns per day. So this is the end of day 2, end of turn 6. 3 real main areas of British defence. One is to try and form a line from the west banks of Blackbridge Brook and the southern parts of Barton Wood, which will defend East Cowes and West Cowes. The second one is to try and hold a central area, and as I discussed previously, this was not well thought out, so the central area was a bit ill-defined. Basically, it's Carisbrooke and Newtown, and hopefully the plan was to hold the west bank of the Medina and the Western Downs. Just behind that, we've got a reserve, generally quite low quality units, a couple of militia in there holding Parkhurst Forest, and that is largely to block any advance on these towns here. Newtown, West Cowes and the West Cowes blockhouse are way out in the west, all by themselves. It's a garrison of Guard infantry holding Yarmouth Castle. The French, for their part, have sent an all-arms force to contest East Cowes, so they're trying to do battle around here. A largely infantry attack on the centre and a largely cavalry attack swinging down to the south and up to the western parts of the island. Okay, not going hugely well for the British. Like I mentioned, this was not a great defensive plan here, and the French, as it stands, are contesting the Western Downs and have got 2 units across the Medina. So this central position is already under pressure. Okay, turn 7. Let's see what happens next. So what happens next? Oops, that's a little bit too small. Zoom in there, or zoom out rather. What happens next is that kind of a mixed bag, really. If we look here in the eastern part of the island, up in the north here, I don't know if you recall, but there was a British light cavalry unit there in the turn 6. That's not now there. So British light cavalry unit has been broken, and the defensive line is now pushed well back from Blackbridge Brook and is holding this part of the island here across the woods. So continued French gains there, putting these defenders under more pressure. To the west, there were 2 cavalry units sent to Yarmouth Castle, and there's now only 1. The light cavalry was broken by the garrison, just leaving the heavy cavalry there. I should just mention here that how you should think about fortifications. Fortification is a feature of a hex that helps in its defence and can help with any attacks launched by the unit holding that hex. You don't have to regard the unit as being crammed into the walls of the fortification. It's a feature of that hex which is of assistance. And because the castles are equipped with artillery, they can also help in attack as well. Just to explain, it might seem a bit odd, for instance, if a cavalry unit was holding a fort, where did they put all the horses? Well, think of the fort as assisting the cavalry unit in its operations in that hex. Anyway, for whatever the rationale there, the French have failed to take Yarmouth Castle and lost a cavalry unit in doing so. You can see these cavalry here. This outflanking cavalry force has now moved up and is starting to attack the reserve in Parkhurst Forest. In the centre, actually, things have got a little bit better for the British. They've actually pushed back some infantry units, not actually pushed back, but actually broken light infantry and guard infantry and reclaimed the west bank of the Medina. On the miners' side, in the fighting around the Western Downs here, they've lost light cavalry and light infantry. So kind of a mixed picture, really, that turn. French have made some gains. British have actually pushed them back in some areas. These 2 units here, they're not dawdling, but they're they're the units sent to deal with Bembridge, and because Bembridge held out until day 2, it's taken them a while to actually get back and get towards the main part of the battle. Okay, turn 8. bring that up and see what happens next. So, turn 8. 1 unit less for the British around Barton Wood. In turn 8, they lost line infantry. So that's leaving quite a scant force now there. If you remember, it was quite a large force. I think 6 units originally assigned to defend that area. There's now heavy cavalry, light infantry, artillery, faced by 8 units, artillery, cavalry, and infantry by the French. So it's looking pretty bad, actually, in the east. Not much better in the centre here, where we've got a French unit on the Western Downs now, which was before held by the British Guard Infantry. So we've had British Guard Infantry broken on the Western Downs. So that high ground is now, the only unit there is now French. We'll have a bit of a zoom in a second. And let's have a quick look at the situation at Yarmouth. As you can see, there's now just the Yarmouth garrison. They've not broken the French cavalry. What's happened is the French cavalry has given up and is riding across further east. So there's the heavy cavalry unit that was previously attacking Yarmouth Castle, just there. It's riding to the east to aid in this attack on Parkhurst Forest. Why do they do that? Well, very sensible reason for doing that. I mean, these are good targets. Yarmouth Castle and Yarmouth, quite a lot of victory points. So why would they, after suffering 1 loss, the French break from this combat? The reason they broke from this combat is that a guard infantry unit normally breaks on 10. They're in Yarmouth Castle. Well, they're not in it necessarily. They've got Yarmouth Castle helping them in the defence. That boosts them to 11. So they've got a break value of 11, hard to break. The French heavy cavalry's got a break value of 10, which is obviously makes it a tough unit. All the same, it's effectively less than the guard infantry. And also, because Yarmouth Castle's got artillery, the British will get a +1 roll on their melee attacks. So basically, the odds are really against 1 unit slogging it out against a guard infantry battalion holding that hex. Obviously, Yarmouth itself would offer cover in most circumstances, but this is a heavy cavalry, and heavy cavalry does not fight effectively in a built-up area. As you may recall, cavalry units fight as militia if they're obliged to fight in a built-up area. So that would make the situation even worse. And so for that reason, it was probably a very sensible choice for the French player to break off and assist in the battle in the centre. If you want to take Yarmouth, you need to try and rush some light infantry across, perhaps. That's the most mobile infantry unit. Get them to Yarmouth and some horse artillery. But as you can see, really the French have focused all those sorts of a lot of those mobile forces here. So basically, you take your choice. Do you focus here? Do you focus in the west? In this game, the French player focused on the east. Didn't have the resources to take Yarmouth Castle and gave up, probably quite sensibly. Battles being joined here. We've got artillery, 2 French artillery units, which will be able to bombard the British units, trying to make them easier to pick off. And you've got, as I mentioned before, the Western Downs have now fallen. So this outflanking unit, this outflanking movement is really paying dividends now for the French. A little bit further south, been there quite a while now. British heavy cavalry got drawn into combat, which maybe they shouldn't have got drawn into, and they've been surrounded for a few turns now. Just can't break out, and they're being kept there by encircling French forces. Okay, so that is turn 8. Let's have a look at turn 9, which is the end of day 3. Right, so in turn 9, it's getting even worse in Barton Woods. Let's zoom in on that just to demonstrate that. So there were 3 units last turn. Now there's only 2. We've got heavy cavalry and we've got artillery, and the French are suffering no losses. Absolutely no losses whatsoever. I think they lost a unit in forcing a crossing of Blackbridge Brook, and that is it. Why is that? Well, basically, the French sent some very powerful units. You can see guard infantry, heavy cavalry, and also, sometimes the rolls go against you. And I recall there were some very frustrating rolls as the British player just could not catch a break. And you can see the British defences just being whittled away there in the east of the island. To the west, the French have actually lost some light cavalry. So these attacks on Parkhurst Forest are, I think they broke a unit in the, during day 3, well, earlier in day 3, but they've now lost light cavalry. So this reserve is actually proving a little bit of a tough nut to crack. If we see in the centre, well, the light infantry that broke the Guard infantry, triumphant in their success, has charged down off the downs and taken out the artillery unit. So the British have now got no artillery support in the centre of the island. The French have got quite a bit, firing across the Medina and assisting the infantry in their attacks. So, not great. To the south, a little bit further south, I can see that the isolated British unit is still isolated, still holding out, but not able to break free. Okay, that is the end of turn 9, which is the end of day 3. 1 day of combat left. Let's see how things turned out. Okay, that's the situation after turn 10. Only artillery left now, so now the heavy cavalry has been broken for the British defenders. Only artillery trying to hold out 8 units. That's only going to end in one way, I'm afraid. So, yeah, it looks like East Cowes and the blockhouse will fall. The Guard infantry holding Newport are doing quite well. They've not broken any units, but they've pushed. As you can see, there's a hex gap there. They've forced the unit to retreat by disordering it. So they're doing okay, holding off these attacks. As you can see now, from the south, though, a lot more pressure from the French as they are sort of moving off the downs and attacking these defences from the south. And the British cavalry unit, which was previously, okay, isolated, it was at least tying down 3 units. Now it's not. It's been broken. Parkhurst Forest, somewhat different story. In Parkhurst Forest, we've got light infantry, which moved off the downs, moved around to support this attack of the cavalry. Light infantry's been broken. So the Parkhurst Forest Reserve is doing its job really well. Probably the only highlight at the moment for the British player. Having a look at the victory point situation, victory points are calculated by looking at the objectives that have been captured, which are the settlements and the fortifications. They've got different values according to where they are. You then add to that number the number of French units on the board, and you subtract the number of British units. At the moment, that is standing at 21 points. Now, the inconclusive outcome range is 21 to 30. Less than that, you have a British victory. If it's a lot less than that, it's decisive. And more than 30, you've got a French victory. And if it's a lot more than 30, it's a decisive French victory. So at the moment, it's inconclusive if you were to stop the battle right now. But you would say the French are looking to be gaining more objectives from the strength of their position here in particular. Okay, turn 11, the penultimate turn. And you can see up here, no red units left. So the artillery, not surprisingly, has been broken. And East Cowes and East Cowes Blockhouse are now, there's nothing to stop them being taken. In the centre, some significant developments. Let me just zoom in on them. So there's a kind of a stalemate at Parkhurst Forest. These cavalry are basically charging, trying to dislodge the militia and line infantry. These line infantry that's holding the woods, with no success. No further losses this turn, at least for the French. However, whilst that's great for the British player, that's really all there is. Actually, I think, no, I'd say it has got worse. No, the French have actually lost another light cavalry unit. There was another light cavalry unit that was south of Carisbrooke Castle, which charged round to try and attack this reserve, and that's been lost. So the French cavalry continues to sort of throw itself in vain against the militia and the line infantry holding Parkhurst Forest. However, down here you can see, I'll just zoom in a bit further. You can see that Carisbrooke Castle has been taken. There's Carisbrooke Castle. The British line infantry was disordered, forced to retreat all the way over there, and the French have now captured it. There's a lot of pressure. Attacks across the Medina, attacks from the south. That's quite a major objective. So let's have a look at that, or the effect that's had. The French now have 25 victory points as it stands. Still not enough to win, but you've got East Cowes and East Cowes Blockhouse are worth 8 points between them. So you can see, and now there's nothing to stop those being taken in the final turn. So really the French are looking on being fairly confident of having 30 plus points next turn as it stands, which would be a marginal win. A win's a win, hey? The blockhouses, I should mention, these are basically fortified batteries facing out to sea. So they're the two fortifications that don't actually help in melee. They don't direct their guns inland. They can only shoot out to sea. But of course, they're a great objective, because if the French player captures these, any attempt to retake or reinforce the island will be much more difficult for the British, because there's some outward firing guns aiming at them. So they're quite high value targets. Okay, so let's see how the final turn pans out. Here's the situation then at the end of turn 12. And there's been a few changes. Okay. Yes, the French have marched into East Cowes and captured the blockhouse unopposed. Still no progress at Parkhurst Forest. These two surviving cavalry units are been battled to a standstill. It's all happened in the centre. Let's have a quick look. Okay, so let's move up a bit. So the French have succeeded in breaking a light infantry unit. There was light infantry there, so they pushed the light cavalry back. Light cavalry has been forced to retreat. Normally, disordered units can only retreat one hex, but they are allowed to retreat through a friendly unit, the hex beyond. In doing so, disorders that friendly unit, and so actually the British are really lucky to have held on to Newport. So the light cavalry has been disordered and forced to retreat. The light infantry that was sat there has been broken, and this French light infantry unit is now pushed further north. So really the suburbs of Newport are being threatened from three directions here. But what you'll see in the centre is that a late counter-attack. This militia, who was part of Parker's first reserve, and the line infantry unit that I think had been pushed out of Carisbrooke Castle, have counter-attacked and have broken the French unit that took Carisbrooke Castle and reoccupied it. And that has quite a big influence on the result. If we look at what happens to the points values now, the French actually have got 30 victory points, which is right on the edge of an inconclusive victory slash French victory, inconclusive result slash marginal French victory. Just comes down on the side of an inconclusive result. So that last action, I remember it quite well. It was literally the last attack of the day, and the last dice roll of the day saw the British retake Carisbrooke Castle, break the unit that was there, and actually come away with an inconclusive result when they looked like they would lose. It was quite an interesting battle, that. Maybe partly down to some fairly naive defending on my part, but whatever. It was quite a close run thing, as Wellington might have said. Okay, so that's really the conclusion of the playtest. I think it's worth mentioning a couple of things which may have occurred to you when you're looking at this. Firstly, did the French send too many forces to capture East Cowes? Yes, they succeeded, and yes, that's a high value target, and yes, they actually took out 6, I think, defending units for the loss of only 1. So actually, that was quite a lot of gain of victory points. But you could argue, well, did they really need all this? 8 units committed to this battle. Well, who knows? If they committed 6, they might not have taken it. If they committed 5, they might not have taken it. I think when I sent 2 cavalry units to bolster the defences here, the French were really obliged to take this very seriously and have a large force here. The reason for that is that if the cavalry had still been there in the last couple of turns and had broken out, being so mobile, they could have retaken Ryde, they could have retaken Brading. And that happened in other playtests, that where the French were not able to form a coherent line at the end of the battle, and there was cavalry, and that cavalry managed to take out a unit, break a unit, and break through, they could then run amok in the rear and recapture all these objectives. And they could spend turns 11 and 12 just charging around, removing these tricolors, and depriving the French of a lot of victory points. The converse of that is why the Yarmouth Castle garrison just sat there. Once they'd seen off that attack, or okay, you've seen off the attack, chase them. Well, no, because this is Guardian Infantry, moves at 3 hexes, got 3 movement points, moves at 3 hexes per turn at best. If they moved off there, the French light cavalry with 8 movement points could quite easily get round them and occupy Yarmouth Castle, Yarmouth, in the absence of the garrison. So the garrison was kind of the mobility of the cavalry, which actually becomes more pronounced towards the end of the battle when there's less units on the table to engage cavalry and to slow them down. The mobility of the cavalry really does have an impact on how you approach those last couple of turns. It will tend to keep defenders pinned there because they're worried that if they move off, a cavalry unit will nip in behind them and capture them. It will also make the French very nervous of a cavalry-led counterattack. Now, as it happens, the British cavalry was kind of misused in this battle, somewhat frittered away in a fairly inconclusive charge on turns 1 and 2. And really on that, from then off afterwards, was on the back foot. But in other playtests, if the British could retain some cavalry, they were then able to potentially counterattack, and that's when the British were able to score victories, and occasionally a conclusive victory by counterattacking with cavalry, capturing objectives late in the day. Similarly, the French, if they got cavalry left, it really does make it very difficult for the British to move away from just holding these fortifications because they're scared they're going to be lost. Anyway, that's a quick discussion of one playtest of Vectis. It was an inconclusive outcome. I think it's quite an interesting battle. There's a whole range of outcomes that came up with playtests, from the French being almost pushed back to the siege, the British being pretty much wiped out. Do please feel free to download it and play the game yourself if you want. So thank you very much for listening. All the necessary links if you want to know more about Vectis, have a look at a few preview pages, maybe even buy it, are in the description. Thank you very much, and I'll be back soon with something else about Draken games. Thank you. Bye.